everyone, and welcome, and wonderful to see you all again. Those of you who I've seen before, and welcome to those of you streaming on Facebook whom I haven't seen. I always love to come to SEYO gatherings. I was with SEYO in Athens in 2017 and Birmingham in 2018, and it's lovely to be with you, not quite as wonderful, but still lovely to be with you in this way as well, and to be with everyone on Facebook. So happy that we're here. We're very excited to have with us today two special guest presenters, Peter Nicholson and Mary Allison from Systema Scotland, who are going to talk about some of the beautiful and important work that's going on there. Before I introduce them, though, I'm going to spend just a few minutes framing our session and getting you sort of acclimated to the way we're going to be thinking. When we ask people, teachers, program leaders in Systema programs to tell us about, sort of in a nutshell, what difference does their work make in the world, you're usually likely to hear an answer that's something along the lines of, my work helps people. My work makes people's lives better. I change people's lives, all of which is absolutely true. But they're usually thinking about individual people that they've changed. Maybe in some instances, they're thinking about small communities or neighborhoods. But more and more, people around the world are starting to think about this work as changing on a whole different level, the lives of larger communities and even sometimes the lives of systems. And I'm talking about, as some of you may know, people in influential positions around the world, including people who are not in the arts, are beginning to look to the arts as a place that can actually make social and economic and political change, as well as individual change in the world. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. That idea is what we're going to be developing. Not at all to say that we don't absolutely make a crucial difference in individuals' lives every day. That is at the heart of our work, and that always will be. And I'm not suggesting we change really anything about the work we do. I'm suggesting that we frame it and use language for it that's a little different and that we may not have been able or thoughtful to use before. And we're going to start with hearing from Peter and Mary about how Systema Scotland is doing some actually pioneering work in this area. And I'm going to say I don't really need to introduce Systema Scotland to most of you here, but for anyone listening who's not familiar, Systema Scotland began in 2008 with a program called Big Noise in Raploch. Over the last decade and more, they have slowly and carefully enlarged the program in Raploch and rolled out several more sites, and they are about to open their 5th site in Edinburgh in 2022. Eric and I were there in 2012 to visit and see the program, and probably nobody there remembers that because they had more important guests at that time, namely the entire Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra and Gustavo Dudamel. And I will never forget, as long as I live, listening to them play with the little wee Scottish kids sort of wedged between the tall, commanding Venezuelans in the orchestra, playing ferociously with Dudamel conducting, and the entire community of Raploch standing in a rain-drenched field, pouring down rain and cheering on their children. So that is a very powerful image of community involvement that I have never, ever forgotten and never will. So now to introduce our guests, Peter Nicholson has been Director of Music at Systema Scotland since 2018. And prior to that, he worked as one of the teams of musicians at Big Noise Raploch ever since 2009. And Mary Allison is Systema Scotland's Monitoring and Evaluation Officer. She joined the team this year, and she brings extensive research and evaluation experience from a range of sectors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Peter and Mary.
Thank you very much, Tricia. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I wish I had been there. I was in Scotland at that time, but I wasn't with Systema. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I have some slides, and then Peter will speak after me. So I'll do that little bit of admin first of getting my slides up on the screen. There we go. That should be working. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So as Tricia said, I'm Allison, and I'm responsible for evaluation and monitoring in Systema Scotland. And I have a background in social and public research in universities. I worked for a time in the World Health Organization. Most of my research has been in the area of public health and social systems for health. And today I'm going to share research that actually preceded me at Systema, but is one of the reasons why I was really keen to come and work in evaluation in Systema, because of the quality and the richness and the depth of this research. It's very rare to find that in programmes and projects that work in the third sector, as we call it in Scotland, or in a charitable space. Often those programmes are short-term snapshots of evaluation. It's very rare to find this high quality, and so I'm very excited to be able to share this with you today. So there's a huge amount of research that's been published, and I'm going to give you the web link for this at the end, but it's been done, a lot of it independently. So whilst we do a lot of our own research inside Systema Scotland in our 4 big noise centres, soon to be 5, there's been a lot of independent work done, which gives it a real quality, and you know, it's been subject to scrutiny. We haven't been involved in the design of it. We've been able to collaborate in some aspects of it, but it has been independent. So what I'm going to share with you today in terms of findings is really very good quality research that we haven't influenced. This is what other people have come into our organisation and found. It's been done by our government, it's been done by our universities, the University of Dundee, the Glasgow Centre for Population Health, Glasgow Caledonian University, our national agencies like our education agency, who monitor the quality of our teaching work in Scotland, and our National Public Audit Office, Audit Scotland, have also been involved in this work. There's a wide range of it, and as you can see, it's published, it's available online. The design of the research that I'm going to share some findings about is really quite unique. I've worked in research for many, many years, and it is so rare to be able to do a life course design, to be able to be in contact with children when they first come into a programme, before they start school, into their primary school, to be following groups of children all through that primary education, all through the experiences of being involved, of starting instruments, of maybe changing instruments, of maybe leaving and coming back, right the way through their high school, and then on now, as we are in Rapalog, to the period when they're leaving school and they're getting employment. And that design meant that we could spend a long time, years, looking at how exactly does Systema Scotland, through the 4 big noise centres here, what does it produce? How does it do that? How does it reach the children, the families, the communities, more broadly, that place-based work? So it takes a really holistic look at what those programmes have been doing with the children, with the families, with the communities in those areas. It was largely qualitative in the beginning because it was about understanding. It was about having lots and lots of conversations to understand what was happening and what was going on. Conversations with the children, conversations with parents, conversations with other significant adults, musicians, teachers, people in that community. And now that we understand that, we are now measuring some of the longer term impacts. So we understood in those early years that we were making a difference to the confidence, to the education, to the social skills, the health and well-being of children and young people in their communities. Now we are trying to measure, so what difference has it made to their chances in the world, their opportunities to get jobs, to get employment, to move on to higher education, to stay out of the justice system, to stay out of welfare support systems, and to be able to contribute to an economic culture. So it's really, we're looking at all of that now, and that will go on for the next 20 years. And as I say, that's a very unique and really privileged piece of research to be able to do. The methods that were used are described in detail in the June 15 report, and I'm not going to go through them all. It's a bit dull to go through every bit of that methodology, but there were hundreds of hours of interviews. There was quite a lot of creative work done. There was participatory filmmaking, the children were drawing, there was classic survey work. So there was lots of different ways of trying to understand what was going on. In short, as the big yellow sticker says, it was really extensive, it was rigorous, it was very high quality, and it's been peer reviewed. So the people who did this independent work, they published it in academic journals, and any of you who have tried to publish in academic journals, it's not easy. There's a lot of critique of the work, so it has to be really robust, and it was. And here's the stories of what we got out. Now, a list of 7 bullet points in no way really does justice to the richness of that research, but it does indicate, I think, really clearly the connections between what we do and the kind of things that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are about, because it's about how we as individuals, how we raise our children, how we educate our children, how in doing that we change the nature of our communities, and how in changing the nature of communities we build better societies and ultimately better worlds. And they sound really ambitious, way beyond the things that we do. But the work that we've done with the Glasgow Centre for Population Health shows in detail in those reports how that is a credible and logical thing to draw from the kind of work that we do. Because we boost engagement with education through listening skills, concentration, focus. Children are able to engage more with their education in general, not just with their music education. Developing and consolidating life skills, how to focus, concentrate, how to make choices, how to deal with conflict, things that happen every day to adults. We begin to develop and consolidate them for children through the medium of working in ensembles using orchestra and music practice. Securing emotional well-being, learning to be resilient, learning to be confident, learning to and growing and developing esteem and a sense of secure mental health. Building social skills and networks, learning to work together. Many of the children in some of the communities that we come to have had traumatic lack of trust and trust broken experiences, and being able to build and connect and strengthen and have relationships that again make children feel confident in their social skills. Linked strongly to respite and protection. Children where they feel safe, they have a place where they can feel protected, listened to, and heard, and the sense of security and protection that can give our young people. Developing as a musician, obviously the practice, the hours, the attention, the opportunity, the instruments, the tuition, everything about that, helping young people to develop their musician skills. And encouraging healthy behaviours, not just the playing and the practicing, but also the time to rest, the time to relax, the time to kick back with their friends, the mental healthy behaviours, the time to eat well, the time to have healthy snacks, the walking between buildings, the playing together, all healthy behaviours that are encouraged as part of our work. And these, as I said, impact pathways are 7 bullet points, but in these reports, they're really detailed models of how these things are produced. And I've stuck a little trumpet above some of these sustainable development goals. I don't know if it's a universal saying, but we can blow our trumpet about many of these. No poverty. We're working in communities where often poverty has been at the heart of the inequality and the lack of justice and the lack of security and the lack of safety. But we are working to try to change that. Zero hunger, by feeding children, by making sure children have access to healthy food, good health and well-being, mental health, but not just the absence of disease, the bigger, broader sense of being a healthy person. Quality education, our assessments show that what we are delivering is not just an education, but a really high quality one. gender equality, linked to our inclusion and our work on accessibility, decent work, economic growth contributing to education, industry, innovation, infrastructure, again connected to a healthier place, a healthier community, a sense that people can work together to innovate and achieve things. Reduced inequalities absolutely at the heart of what we do here in Scotland and throughout systemic projects, I'm sure. And sustainability and communities, a very place-based programme where it isn't just an individual child or a school, it's actually the impact that we're trying to have through generations of children and through wider community, family and caregiving. Peace, justice and strong institutions. Again, a lot of work done with young people on good behaviour, safety, protection, feeling confident, feeling, able to negotiate, to make good decisions. So many more. There are a lot here about environmental sustainability. And we're currently having discussions and conversations about how we link to these. But I have a really strong view, and many of the work of the UN on the Sustainable Development Goals is if we create better people, we create stronger communities and better places, then these things are connected. People want to live in better environments that are more respectful of other attributes of those communities. Delivery principles, Peter will talk to in much more detail, but simply, doing music, playing music, having an orchestra, it doesn't deliver all those things. It's the approach through which we do it, the very considered and deliberate approach, committing to being in a community for the long term, really saying we will be here with you in this way for your entire period of education. The quality relationships, the musicians I've experienced, I've been so happy to be able to get out of my home through lockdown and go and see some of the summer school activities, and the kind of relationships and the tangible respect and work that goes on between the children and musicians and between the children themselves. Inclusivity, accessibility, making it really possible for anybody to be part of this, to join, to leave, to rejoin and to be welcomed. The intensity and immersion, this isn't an evening a week for an hour, this is something that's a huge part of their time as a young person. Innovation and flexibility never more evident than during lockdown, where things had to be innovated, ways of maintaining those relationships, the connections, the responsibility for being in that community. And we have lots of examples of that, and we continue to seek ways of addressing issues and challenges as they arrive through innovation. Collective cooperative learning, learning in small groups, learning in bigger groups, learning to be together and be safe being together and be happy being together, and together, learning together. And the excellence, the aspiration and the inspiration of you saw one of our ambassadors this morning, that sense that they're part of a network that they can inspire others with and can achieve these levels of excellence, maybe not just in music, but being in a community which can achieve these things. And I'm going to leave it there and pass on to Peter now, but this is our web link for our research, where all those documents and the models and the detail is there if you want to look at how we can make these cases for the connection between what we do and what the UN Sustainable Development Goals are about. I'm going to stop sharing now and pass on to Peter.
Thanks so much, Mary. And it's good to see again. Obviously, I'm very familiar with a lot of that research, but it's good to see it again laid out like that, and to think of that, the long-term nature of the research, because I think that's what's really exciting for us, that the formative stage of that research has happened, but it's looking at the summative stages in the next 10, 20 years, looking at the life progression of a lot of the young people that we work with. So yeah, thanks. So I will try and pick up from that, and I guess try and illustrate with particular reference to the 7 principles, how our delivery on the ground, how the programs, how the Big Noise programs enable us to work with the communities and work with the young people to achieve some of those principles. Now, I'm really aware of the context here as well in terms of the audience. And I know that the majority of folk here, and quite possibly on Facebook as well, who are watching, are involved in SEYO programs. So I'm sure as you listen to Mary's presentation, that all of you would have recognized many of those things in the programs that you yourselves run. So I think what I'm going to attempt to do in my short segment is not to give you a detailed exposition of how our program works, because I think a lot of you will be very familiar with some of those elements. So instead, what I'd like to do is I've picked out three sort of key areas that perhaps offer a slightly different slant on how we work with the communities and how we work with the young people to develop these things. Again, some of these things you may well already be doing, and some of them may be new. And actually, this is just an open invitation. If there's anything that I mention and that your program already doing to a really high degree, I'd love to hear from you. Equally, if there are things that I talk about here that are new for you or that you're interested or excited about, we've got a moment, as Tricia said, to have some questions afterwards. And I'd be really very happy to carry on the conversation with any of you after the event. So the three areas that I really want to focus on or look at are roughly under the three headings. So that's adaptability and innovating our model, and the importance of being flexible. Then the other is really around inclusivity and support, direct support for children and young people and communities. And then the third area I'd like to look at is around cooperative learning and collective working. So you can see some they're related to the 7 principles, which I'll come back to at the end. Before that, as I just get, I do have a presentation to share with you. Before that, though, I will just very quickly, for those who aren't familiar with our program, this slide hopefully just gives a very quick snapshot of what we do, just to give you that context. So as Tricia says, we work across now 4 sites in Scotland, and all of the 4 centres follow roughly, not identically, but roughly the same model. So all of our programmes are early intervention and long-term. They are all aimed to be inclusive, intensive and immersive experiences, as Mary highlighted. And the key thing is that we enable pathways from birth to adulthood in the programmes. So as you can see from this slide, in each centre we have a baby noise programme which runs for parents and carers, and then the curriculum is managed in a way that then it's a through journey for each of the participants. So from nursery they go on and learn in school. So in our programmes, the early years, so that's from age 5 to age 7 or 8, all of the children and young people in our communities have big noise delivered through the school, and that's sort of 2 45-minute sessions per week where we get to know the children and we hopefully get to know their parents and their teachers. Then from around the age 7 or 8 onwards, the children and young people are then come to our after-school programs voluntarily on a voluntary basis, and this is where we start to work on all of those elements that I'll go on and touch on later on. We then, as this slide suggests, we start with a string-only program. We then add wind and brass when the children are around 8 or 9, 10 years old. And then we still aspire to create orchestras and ensembles. So then bringing them together and working with our amazing team of musicians and with key partners to create amazing performances, it says here, and to provide opportunities for the children and young people. And then the last element of this slide, I think, is important, which is, I'm trying to move back, I can't see it under my screen, but it's about the additional things that we offer. So the adult orchestra, which I will touch on, and then the community element, which is really crucial. So the first of these 3 areas that I'd like to draw folks' attention to is around testing, trialling and adapting our program model. So as Tricia said, we started in 2008 and we've tried not to rest on our laurels at any point, and we've tried to make sure that we keep adapting the program to find the best balance of sessions within each of our centres to make the most of the resource that we have. So that might mean, what the shape of the after school program is, looking at, well, if we see the children for this long, how much do we want to spend, how much time are we going to spend in ensembles, in general musicianship, in an orchestra ensemble, and how much in one-to-one lessons. And this is, I think, a really key point for us at the moment, actually. And I know for many Systema programs, it's the resourcing and whether it's possible to have those small group one-to-one lessons. Those are a real priority for us. And in some of our centres, we're able to do that. And in others, it's more of a challenge to get that protected space where that relationship can really flourish. It's not the only place the relationship can flourish, but we feel that those small groups are really, really critical. So I think that's one of the key things. It's understanding that balance of sessions. Related to that, still talking about the after-school program that we offer, it's making sure that the progression is there for the children and young people. So looking at our orchestra and ensemble levels, this is something that we've continually developed and looked at and honed. And now, for any of you that are directly involved in programs for interest, in the primary years in Scotland, that's between ages of 7 and 11. Over those 5 years of primary school, we've found that actually having approximately 3 to 4 string orchestras is about the right balance for that, in terms of creating enough of a foundation in which all children can access the learning, but enough of an aspiration for the children to want to progress through those orchestra and ensembles. Iterative approaches. So I put this because I think this is, again, it relates to the things I just said, but keeping us always open and always on our toes. So not resting and thinking, well, how can we make this better? Obviously, the pandemic has really highlighted this, as Mary said, and I'm sure many of you obviously are well versed in. But actually, as we now go back to face-to-face delivery, it's made us really think, how can we change? How can we learn from something we've trialed and adapt it? So again, across our 4 centres, we've been able to do this and trial new things, trial new ways of running the after-school programs, for instance. To give a couple of examples of this, we experimented over the last few years in one of our centres with a specific jazz ensemble and a jazz track where the children are perhaps it's less about notation reading, and we're looking at how can we expand that, how can we make that work in our other centres and perhaps embed that throughout the programme. So I think that iterative approach, always thinking, well, how can we change this? How can we do this better? Increasingly wanting to work with communities and with the young people to help us support and design our programs so that we keep them alive and keep that motivation there, which is so critical for the children and young people. And then community is just touching on the kind of wraparound elements of the program, which again, I think are a really important component of how we work with communities. So we have baby noise programs, as mentioned earlier, so that we work with parents and families as the children start to come to Big Noise. And then importantly, we have a growing community of adult orchestras. And even within lockdown, actually, we've discovered that there has been quite a hunger for this, even for community choirs, community orchestras. We've been able to keep having some lessons with parents online throughout this. And again, it's something along with community representative groups, which are non-musical, which I will touch on in a short while, I think are again really critical for us to really embed ourselves in a community, which again enables us to hit on those across the 7 principles. So that's the first element, I think. So really, to sum up, what's important here is that idea of being adaptable, of sticking to having that core purpose, but being able to be flexible and to adapt and to find what works best in each of the individual situations that we're working in. The next area that I'd like to focus on is around nurturing and mentoring and that more direct support for children and young people. And so I'm going to start with quite a specific example of a partnership which we're developing with an organisation called Children First. It's a charity that works across Scotland. That is there. It's not a music group. They are a charity that work to support particularly vulnerable young people who've experienced trauma, but also just to work with local authorities to give that additional support to parents and to children that need it. They have worked with a group called International Futures Forum to develop a resource called Kit Bag. And I don't have time to go into this here in detail, but I recommend folks to have a look. In fact, after my talk, I'll post this in the chat so you can find that link more easily. But Kitbag is an amazing resource which we've started using in a couple of our centres, and it's really simple. It's a very physical resource. In fact, I've got one on my shelf. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to find it. It's a really simple tool that we've started to use in some of our work to support the well-being of some of the more vulnerable children that we work with, but also actually all of the children as they come back, especially as we emerge from the pandemic and there's a lot of issues with mental health. It's a wrap that is like this. So it's for younger children and young people. I'll move my screen down here so you can see it a little bit better. And it has a range of things. It's really simple. You don't really need the kit, as they say. But it has some cards that have, it's got a feelings card where you give this to the children and they talk about which colour they're feeling today. And then it gives them an opportunity to tell stories about how they're feeling. It's got beautiful sort of animal cards that have pictures of animals and qualities on them. So that's a presence, be, and all sorts. Anyway, I could talk all day about this. It's a really exciting new venture, and it's just one example of how we're always working to think, well, how can we partner with other organisations to support children and young people, and how can we embed other practices alongside the music. So this is a resource that I see being particularly effective in working in a small group, in a sectional rehearsal, where perhaps some of the children are not feeling so great, and this is just a quick tool that we can use. So that's another example, again, of how we're really working with enabling all learners. Related to that, very much related to that, this is just to give an example, in Govan Hill, Glasgow Centre, we have not been able to run our normal sessions through the pandemic, and instead we've just worked with about 20 particularly vulnerable children, again, who weren't able to access the digital programme. And these nurture sessions, again, it was that iterative approach. We tore up what we normally do in our after-school programs and had the children come and it's a half hour of game playing with the staff that they know, and then they move into sectionals. So again, it's just that idea of how can we support all learners. And then this is for everybody. So that mentoring and emotional support, I think, is critical. And it's as much about helping children as they grow older, especially in the programme. It's giving the additional support that some of our parents and families just don't instinctively know how to do. So if it comes to writing a college application or an application for one of the national youth orchestras, we've got our staff will just instinctively have that relationship and bond with students to be able to help them support to write that application. And it can be really simple things like that just go unnoticed, but actually are so critical and can be transformational in a child's life. You know, the difference between sending off a well-written application that can get them into a course and not doing that can be huge. So I think those things, again, I'm sure many programs are doing this, but I just think it's worth highlighting as something that I think is particularly important. And then in terms of pathways for all participants, this is something, it's obviously related to all of these things. I put it there as something that we're starting to do more intentionally, and sitting down with every child as they reach the end of their primary school education around 10, 11, and to think with all of them, how can we support them, and how can we support them musically, but also with their general life journey. So the musical pathways, in a way, are the easier ones, where we've got those kids that are already flying, and how do we support them through the programme and beyond. But it's also, I was really fascinated by a talk we had from a community development academic called Bruce Keaton, and he talked to us about thinking about pathways and thinking about, well, what is the journey for a young person in your program at age 6, starting on a violin, to then becoming a member of the Scottish Young Parliament, for instance, and what is that journey? And that made me really think about how we're going to create pathways, both musical and non-musical, for the children and young people. Third and final area, I think it would be good to highlight in this brief run through of what we do in our program to support the 7 principles, is around collective and cooperative working and learning. First and foremost is understanding the staff that we have. So we are lucky in a way in Scotland in the way that we're set up. We have these 4 centres and a central charity, and we're able to communicate really quickly and well across those sites. So we've set up learning quartets. So for each different area of our programme delivery, be that for the early years primary delivery, or it might be for the intermediate string group, it might be for the adult orchestra. We have these learning quartets set up where Zoom obviously has facilitated and made this much, much easier to organise. But even before that, we would, as regular as we could, get the people in the 4 different locations, the 4 different centres together to share learning and to pool learning about how can we make this most effective? How can we share planning documents so that we're not all reinventing the wheel, and instead we can put our energy into the creativity and the innovation of our delivery. So I think that's been really critical, those learning quartets across our staff. And I think that's been a really strong element of Systema Scotland over the years. Very much related to that is our programme of continuing professional development. And so our training for staff has, again, I think always been a real strength, and it's something that we're looking with. Obviously, the pandemic has enabled us to work like many others with many international practitioners, but I think again that's been critical to support all of these things, because they're just the things I've mentioned here today are not perhaps instinctive qualities and skills that musicians come to us with. And so we are absolutely aware that we need to support all our staff and train staff to be able to have those skills in terms of using a resource like this. It may be, or training in pedagogy and other areas. So I think CPD is another key element of our programme. Partnering is something in our, we published, some of you may have seen, I published a revised strategy at the start of this year. And partnering is one of the key pillars, along with innovating, of our strategy. And I put it here really in relation to the musical partners that we work with. And I know many Systema programs are based, with a professional performing ensemble in mind. Again, within Scotland, we are lucky to work with the national orchestras, with the BBC's Scottish Symphony Orchestra and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, amongst others. We're really keen that we start to broaden that bank of partners. So another key area of our work, this is not really related so much to my presentation here, but looking at the sort of global anti-racist agenda. And so we're really looking at the diversity of our offer, working with our communities to develop more partners. Just this morning in our session with Evelyn, we were talking about the importance of creativity, of improvisation, and looking at multiple genres. So we're also really keen. We're not there yet. So in terms of us being a beacon for this work, we'd love to become that. We're on a journey, I would say, to get there. But looking at a much more racially and culturally diverse pool of partners that we work with. But that's been critical over the years. Mary touched on it. Some of the opportunities that we've been able to give to the young people in the communities are critical in terms of getting that aspiration and inspiration for the children to want to progress. So going to Venezuela to play concerts and putting on all these big events. The one that Tricia mentioned at the beginning, where she and Eric came, stood in the rain all those years ago. Putting on those big scale events is really critical, and it's often with partners that we're able to make that happen and make that most effective. And lastly, I'm to come back to community, but this time in a broader sense than just within music groups that we offer. Again, in our strategy, if any of you have a look at it, this is a key area for us to develop. It's really starting to work with communities. So we've changed. Our purpose now says that we're about strengthening communities and working with children and young people to support them to realise their potential. And we are developing community representative groups in all our centres, with the ambition being over the long term to cede power in a way to the community, so that we are not a program doing to, we are a facilitator who are doing with. And our sort of long-term vision is to work with graduates of the program who will come back and start working in the program, and that communities start to have more input and more impact in terms of how we operate and what we do. Again, we're at the start of that journey, so we are by no means experts. And if any of you out there are doing that work and are further down the road in that journey, I'd be delighted to hear from you. But for us, that's a really critical element of what we're doing, working with those community groups to support the children and young people to thrive and to survive. I've just got a couple more slides. I'm pretty much there. I've just put this one in again just to bring everything back to these 7 principles, because I think for anyone working within a Sistema program, you will recognize these. And I think, you know, the important thing is that we're all able to champion this, because I think it's inherent in that supportive, inclusive, intensive program. And it's that long term. So to come back to the very first one, and Mary mentions at the beginning, I think where we've been successful is in working with communities to make them realize and to understand that we are here for the long term, not the short term, and that we are part of the fabric of the communities we work in. So the last slide I'll leave you with is lovely, and it's just to show you some of the journeys of the young people, which I'm sure many of you in other programs are familiar with, but it's just quite cute because I know all these young people. So this is them from a variety of photos from around 2009 to 2012. This is them now. And it's always reminding ourselves what we're about is supporting those long-term journeys from childhood, but to support these children and young people and the communities that they're from. And as Tricia was saying right at the beginning, to tie it right back to the SDGs, is then the impact that they can have on their broader communities in their life journeys. So I think that's the critical message for me. It's that life-term course. But that is everything from me. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Mary. Beautiful evocation of the work of Sistema Scotland, and we appreciate it, we aspire to it, and we're going to use it as a kind of model as we go forward and talk in the rest of our session about ways of thinking bigger. Before we do, are there any immediate questions for Peter or Mary? You will also have chances to ask questions later. But speak up, raise your hand if you have a question now, because I can. Okay, then let's move on. As I say, you can ask questions throughout, and you can ask questions at the end. What I'd like to do now is share my screen and go back to that beautiful and ambitious chart of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, because I have one of those too. And that's what I'd like to drill down on right now. So give me a moment to do that. And here we go. Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So you might want, those who are not familiar with this, take a good look, and because we're going to be really thinking about them a lot for the rest of the session. And for those who are listening on Facebook but can't see, I'm going to read through them very fast. Number 1 is no poverty. Number 2 is zero hunger. Number 3 is good health and well-being. 4, quality education. 5, gender equality. 6, clean water and sanitation. 7, affordable and clean energy. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. 10, reduced inequalities. 11, sustainable cities and communities. 12, responsible consumption and production. We're getting there. 13, climate action. 14, life below water. 15, life on land. 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And finally, 17, partnerships to achieve all of those first 16 goals. What these are is a set of priorities that the United Nations General Assembly first put together in 2015. And these 17 goals were what they deemed essential to be realized before 2030. So here we are 6 years later. We're in a bit of a pinch, it looks like, because we haven't moved that far on any of them. So the next decade is going to be crucial on doubling down on all those. And so these are not only now UN categories, these have become widely known around the world as the benchmarks, the roadmap for how the world, as internationally, how we're making progress toward all of the things that matter most importantly for life on Earth, and for human life particularly. These goals shape the decisions of lots of major institutions, not only the UN, but banks and aid agencies, governments, philanthropies, NGOs, universities. Many institutions around the world are really looking at these and adopting them as ways to measure progress. And you can see that they're a mix of economic and social and environmental targets and priorities. Those are the kinds of things that the United Nations thinks about, right? You can also see that there is not one single slide that mentions the arts explicitly, because supposedly that's the kind of thing that the United Nations doesn't think that much about. That's what we would think. However, that's changing. So this is one of the main things I would like to share with you today I have noticed in my readings on this subject just in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, that people are beginning to think about the arts in a very different way in relation to these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For example, here are a few of the random quotes I've come across. UN 75 is a United Nations sub-agency. They say music is increasingly being used as a catalyst for positive social change throughout the world, direct and potential tool in sustainable rural and urban community building. The next one, Culture 2030 Goal Campaign. I'm going to let you read that yourself. Actually, I'll read it because I know we have listeners who are not seeing. That one is: the full recognition of culture as a driver and enabler of social development could open up new possibilities to accelerate progress across the board. And then finally, from UNESCO, the arts are a powerful means of engendering the skills and knowledge needed to promote sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, peace, global citizenship, and cultural diversity. So look at this really interesting thing that's happening. They set the 17 development goals without thinking about the arts. And now the thinking is coming around to a conclusion that the arts actually are crucial in delivering all of them. So in a way, it almost makes a kind of sense that the arts wouldn't be confined to one of those little boxes, because now people are thinking of them as the way to achieve all of those little boxes. Look at the words which I put in bold that are being used to describe what the arts do. They're a catalyst, they're a tool, they're a driver, enabler, an accelerator, powerful means of promoting sustainable development. These are a very different story from the kind of softer appreciation for the arts that we've gotten so used to, which is that they're change lives and they're nice to have and they help individuals grow and all of those things. We are hearing a whole different kind of language now about the arts. So I think that this is a huge opportunity for us to step up and say, yes, actually, we do all those things. And we're going to show you how, and we're going to show you why, and we're going to make powerful cases that we do all of those things. And in so doing, we're going to open ourselves up to so much more opportunity for partnering with powerful institutions, for engaging in all kinds of activity, to have access to all kinds of activity that we just haven't had before. So I'd like to move to a Jamboard activity now, and I'd love all of you who can to participate in this. If you're not familiar with the Jamboard, what I'd like you to do is choose a sticky note over here And on it, write the number of one SDG that you think your program supports and add a few words explaining why you think this. So this is just in the way of practice now. We're going to practice thinking about the SDGs in relation to what we do in our everyday work. So if somebody can lead off on that, there are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. There is the Jamboard. We have a number 1. We have a, I think decent work and economic growth is number 8, if I'm remembering correctly. Anybody else? Well, there's a number 3. Yes, you can move them around. You can play with them. Okay, yeah, stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to go back to, and then I'll go back to sharing and show you my screen again and share my screen and put those goals up again. Think about them. And be imaginative and be bold. You may not think right off the bat that you have anything to do with no poverty or zero hunger, but I'm imagining you can think of a way that you do actually have something to do with those. So I'd love to see you guys try for just experiment with a number of these goals, because we're going to do a longer thought activity about this afterwards. So this is by way of practice. I'm going to leave it up a couple more minutes and then I'll take it down and you can go back to the Jamboard with new inspiration. Okay, so we have SDGs 1. Oh, good. 8, 13, 5, 10, and 11. Gender equality is, I believe, 5. Number 1, number 10, number 3, number 2. Okay, that's beautiful. I think we'll leave that for now and keep talking. I want to take you to the before we go further. I'm going to just remind you of the example of Systema Scotland, who what you heard from Peter and Mary is that they think so in such detail and so carefully about the individual child and about the relationship between teacher and child, and they're thinking in a really micro, beautiful way about the implications of every single decision they make for every single life in that program. At the same time, they're thinking on a much more macro level. They're partnering with Glasgow Health Agency and with 2 universities to think about their broader impact on the good health and well-being of their entire community. And because they're able to do those 2 kinds of thinking, they can zero in, do meticulously beautiful work that research confirms is effective, and then they're able to zoom out and say, look what we do for whole communities, and look at the implications of our work for a very, very broad spectrum of human experience. So this is kind of what I'm advocating and encouraging you to do. I want you to think in terms of those verbs of being drivers, of enabling, of accelerating the things, all of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The arts are ways that can actually invigorate and energize those. We're going to do a more extensive thought experiment, and I think maybe we'll do that in 2 breakout groups. While I'm just setting that up, everyone who is on the call but off of video, but would like to bring yourselves on to feel comfortable being on video, to be part of this next discussion in our breakout groups, that would be wonderful. So in May 2019, I was invited to the World Bank to talk to them about El Sistema. And that just came about by chance. I happened to do a podcast with someone who worked at the World Bank and was interested in El Sistema and knew about it. So he said to me, most of my colleagues don't know very much about this. Will you come down and talk to us about it? So I went to Washington, talked to roomfuls of investment specialists and managers at the World Bank who spend all day thinking about how to achieve these 17 sustainable development goals. And what they usually think about is water filtration systems and medical clinics and things that are really tangible and quantifiable in that regard. But they listened, they asked questions, and afterwards, one of their most senior administrators said to me, I have been in this business 25 years, and not once in that time have I ever thought about us at the World Bank making an investment in the arts. So now we have these sustainable development goals. They probably are thinking about the arts to some degree. But what I'd like you all to do in these last, sort of the last hour of this session, is to do an experiment and imagine that someday you are going to be talking to that guy at the World Bank who gives you an opening and says, what does your program really have to do with the sustainable development goals? And imagine you have his or her ear and you have some time. How would you build a case that a Sistema program actually achieves those goals? Now, what I'd like to do is to maybe break us into 2 breakout groups. Does that make sense?
Maybe we do the poll first. What do you think?
Let's do the poll. Yeah, we'll do the poll first. And then I'm thinking we'll either convene as a whole group or we'll break out into 2 rooms and we'll choose 3 SDGs that we think are important, and we'll work on those. We're going to ask you to look at a list of 10 sustainable development goals. And it's 10, not 17, only because these polls can only handle 10 choices. So we had to narrow it down to 10. So we chose the 10 likeliest that you guys would choose and be interested in working on. And you're going to look at those 10. You're going to vote on 3, the 3 that you're most interested in working with to try to establish connections between those goals and the work that Sistema programs do. And then once we get the results of those polls, we'll see which are the top 3. This is sort of like ranked choice voting, right? We'll see which is the top 3, and then we'll all either discuss as a group or we'll break out into breakout rooms. And then what we're going to do is write a letter, a Dear World Bank letter.
Tricia, whilst you're waiting for that kind of next step and to get the poll, I just thought it was interesting to say that this is really becoming much more present in European policy. So I think of any meeting of European people, I mean, if you look at the new Creative Europe applications that are coming, they've brought in these things called cross-cutting issues. You have to show you deliver on them. First time ever. You have to show what you're doing about, inclusion, equity, gender, climate change, and therefore actually it's a matter of, I wouldn't say getting on the front foot, but get nearer to the front foot by actually beginning to think in this way, because I think it's going to become more and more a driver, and it really has hit in a lot of the organizations that I work with on a European level. It's like in the language now.
That's fantastic. That has really not happened so much in the US.
No, I think that's right. And so instead of organizations saying this is what we do, and by the way, we could deliver some of these agenda items by that way, they say, actually, let's structure our program around these goals. They do it in completely the opposite direction. Right. I can, if needs be later on, I can give an example of that. But
okay, that would be great. That would be great. So please choose 3. Take your time. These are the 10 that I chose that I thought would be most likely. So choose 3 among them, everyone who can see this, and cast your votes. I'll give you a few minutes. The top one was number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then, right, and the next one was quality education. And then next was good health and well-being.
Yeah.
Okay, we have our winners. And I think that we should, my sense is that we should stay in one group and work together on this, because we're not enough, we're not a large enough group to actually make sense to break up. So here they are. We're doing again, reduced inequalities, number 4, quality education, and number 3, good health and well-being. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen again.
I see Patricia raised her hand, maybe.
Did you have, I'm sorry, did you have a, I'm not seeing Patricia.
Here she
There
is.
you are. Hi.
Hi. Can I make a special request? I know you said we're going to work with 3, but could we add one more for the climate situation? Because all of the social ones, I kind of see a connection. What I always find a challenge is to connect to the non-social, non-human ones, like climate or things that are more external. So could we have the climate one?
Absolutely, we can do that, Patricia. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you the outline of our Dear World Bank letter. So I'm not, there we go. Okay, can you see it? Is that okay? Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, so here are the things that we're going to talk about. And if someone could be note taker for this, that would be wonderful. As we talk, and I'm going to just ask people to speak their ideas, and maybe we'll go. Maybe we'll go one SDG at a time. Let's do that, and let's brainstorm together. And will someone, can I have a volunteer for someone to be a note taker? Anyone?
I'll do it for you.
Thank you. Let's go through these 4 questions and address them. And I think it's really actually, it would be a wonderful exercise to take Patricia's question first about the climate action. And because this is going to require some real thought on our part, and not that the others won't, but this one is an unfamiliar one, so it would be good to get our feet wet. And let's take these questions one at a time, and everyone contribute either in the chat box or by raising your hand to answering each question as well as you can. So in relation to climate action, why and how does your program contribute to this SDG? Or could it? Maybe it doesn't now, but maybe you can think of a way that it could.
Tricia, I see some hands raised from Marshall.
I'm having trouble seeing my.
So Marshall and Patricia have their hands raised.
Okay, so I think that one of the characteristics which I think are common to nearly all SEYO programs are they essentially work at a local level. Local level means not incurring large transport climate change issues, very little flying involved, no business meetings flying and stuff like that, not much travel at all. So in that sense, I think the local nature, the kind of nucleo-based nature of many social action music programs is to begin with a huge kind of help in terms of being responsible about travel, problems from too much travel. One way I think that a lot of people can contribute to things like the climate situation without actually necessarily having done specific things, but I always think the beginning is put your hand up and say, we're not sure that everybody in our organization understands how important climate action is, so we're going to undertake an education program within our program. And the first thing we're going to do is audit our program and find out who, from the kids to everybody else, knows about this and thinks it's important, and have that as a kind of baseline. Then we're going to do a little bit of work talking to everybody, and then we're going to see if we can shift the views to understand that this is very important. So, I think that kind of educate your institution is something we can all do. And I also think then, I'm a great believer in the Naomi Klein thing, which is look for the low-hanging fruit. So what are the things to help reduce climate change acceleration that you can do on all sorts of practical, small but practical ways? Are you using the right kind of power? Are you buying the right kind of food? All of those questions. But what people often need is some kind of something, a little booklet that can help them know what are the things they can do to help. And so I just think, in terms of, what practices can you add to strengthen your contribution? The first thing is make sure your organization knows about this. Right. So education.
Beautiful. Well, that really takes care of a few of these bullet points. In general and specific. Educate, make sure everyone knows about it. The local nature of our work, very contributive. Anyone else have an idea? Patricia, did you did you want to speak? No. Okay, Eric.
I have recently launched the International Teaching Artists Collaborative's Climate Collective. So it's a global group of about 40 or 50 participatory artists who are working on climate issues. And one of the things we've been studying is what does it take to actually change people's beliefs and behaviors. And as we're detailing that information for greater use, we're noticing how amazingly synchronous, same language, same ideas for what Systema programs do. As Peter was mentioning, the focus on pathways over time, and that it takes time to change beliefs and behaviors, and that what teaching artists do is the way that you change people's beliefs and behaviors around climate and around these other SDGs. So using what Marshall just said, which is a program choosing to make a commitment to influencing beliefs and behaviors around climate, the way we practice our work, the very function of a Systema program, is an exemplary model of the way you change beliefs and behaviors. So if in fact it could be raised to priorities so that it is in focus for the young people and the staff and institutional priorities, we're already doing the things that no other contributors to this work are doing. There is no more potent way to change beliefs and behaviors around climate than the way we naturally work with our kids.
Marshall. Yeah.
Sorry, unmuted. I just thought to follow up on what Eric is saying. I think this is a tremendously good way of looking at the kind of practical thing. I think one part of that is to make sure that the governance of your organization gets this. Because there's nothing worse than, to very crudely characterize, you've got a governance. If you've got a management and you've got teachers and the kids, you don't want the people with legal responsibility to be the ones that don't understand this. And so I think a persuasion exercise at governance level, because so much, it's that kind of trickle down thing. Who are you going to listen to if they're not doing it themselves? And if the governance of your organization is not doing that, you have a problem.
I agree with that. And I would also add, almost flip that on its head and say, in order to persuade the governance of an organization, or in order to persuade those top level people, who is most likely to persuade them?
The kids.
That's right. So if you start with the kids and then have them immediately take their case to the top, I think they are going to have a persuasive effect that nobody else could have.
And Tricia, I would just add one of the projects that the Climate Collective has commissioned is doing exactly that, is spending 2 months working with quite young children to open up their understandings and their connections to climate issues, and then loosing them on adult populations as the educators about the urgency of climate issues.
Right.
And they're going to be documenting the impact and the process. So I think we are positioned to do that.
Beautiful. I also think, just from my personal experience, that climate is something that kids are absolutely passionate about, more than young adults, more than middle-aged adults, certainly more than older adults. And so I think that in terms of combining the work of Systema and climate advocacy, that's something that's something that kids are very motivated by. So when you introduce that to kids, that kind of learning and that kind of urgency to your kids, they're motivated to do something about it. They may be motivated to give benefit concerts in favor of it. They may be motivated to write, compose pieces about it. I think there are all kinds of ways that the kids could be centrally sort of engaged around climate at the same time as they are around music, and see in what ways those things coincide. And then let loose them on their parents and their communities and their governance, their boards of directors. Any other thoughts about this? I want to remark on one thing that Eric just said, which is that the entity in his climate collective that is doing that is documenting and measuring and evaluating it. So I would say that for this and for all of our work, this really heightens the importance of assessment and evaluation, documentation, because if we are going to persuade the movers and shakers of the world that we can do these things, we are going to need more tangible evidence than we have yet produced.
And Tricia, I would just affirm that one of the commitments this collective is making is that we have to increase the rigor of our work and just make a commitment to document impact, not unreasonably. There's a lot of stuff that can't be documented and evaluated with clarity, but there are things that can be, and that we hold our own feet to the fire for every project so that we can produce accessible, reliable information without torturing the process.
Right.
I think in that sense, there's quite an interesting, I don't know whether I could share my screen quickly, but there's an interesting UNESCO tool, which is thematic indicators. This is being used in the field of culture. So it's a very broad thing, but there's a thematic indicators for culture in the 2030 agenda. And I could show that if I can. No, I see, because you're in the middle of the screen. Yeah, I can't show my screen at the moment. Yeah, but I think that's quite useful because it's an indicator which shows, it basically puts the different SDGs into things like environment and resilience, prosperity and livelihoods, knowledge and skills, inclusion and participation. And then it actually drills down to that into specific areas to try and show how you're advancing. And I think tools like that are really useful for you to be able to measure how that's actually working.
Can you put that in the chat box, Marshall?
Yeah, I'm going to try and find it online somewhere.
Okay, great. So have we persuaded our World Bank administrator that we are powerfully involved in climate change yet? Are we quite there? Is there anything we might want to add? I mean, we did start with the hardest one. And I think that in this area, at least, we would have to rethink some of the things we do, add some practices to our programs, maybe add some partnerships that we haven't thought of before. But because kids, I'm so glad that Tricia brought this up, because kids are naturally so motivated about environmental and climate issues. I think there's a lot of things we could do here to relate what they do musically to climate activism. Let's all sort of resolve to think about that. Okay, so let's go to our easier ones. I think our first one was reduce inequality. Was that correct? Was that the one that got the most votes? So I would love someone to contribute a sentence or two to this letter to the World Bank about why and how our programs contribute to reducing inequalities. We all sort of think we know, we have a sense of that. That's what we do. We walk around with that in our heads and our hearts. But can you put it into words? Somebody can. Mary, I don't want to put you in the spot. Are you there? But I feel like you're particularly good at putting, you understand the ways that big goals like reducing inequalities can actually be measurable, and like how would you say in a very concrete way that Systema Scotland reduces inequalities?
There's actually a really clear model in one of the research documents that says that. Sorry, I was focused on making your notes there.
Yeah, I realized you were also note-taking.
Yeah, and that's okay. I think it's actually about the giving opportunities. I think part of it is giving opportunities. In Scotland, there's been for a long time a lot of inequality in access to music education. I think the Scottish Government, and actually perhaps helped by Systema, are trying to tackle some of that. But some of it is about reducing that inequality. And through reducing that inequalities, we are actually then giving access to some of the things that happen to children as a result of having a musical education. So some of the cultural capital that goes to children who have a good music education or good arts education, you know, we are bringing that to other children who have been deprived of that access and what that access brings. And that in itself begins to reduce some inequalities. But I think it's then the web that goes from there into you're then not only are children being able to access that kind of capital, they're beginning to access their education in a way, because they are turning up to school more often, they are enjoying a learning experience more often, and therefore they are becoming educated in other ways, which is a huge part of reducing inequalities, because then things like self-care become more important, things like, you know, so for me, the reducing inequalities one is at the heart of the kind of web effect of what happens when you tackle one thing. You begin to raise the possibility of other things being addressed.
Beautiful. When you're finished with all your notes today, include that you just said.
I will do.
Patricia.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, love to hear from you.
You know, when sometimes the light shines through in the sky, Mary, thank you so much for making that connection, reducing inequality, connecting it to providing opportunity. That's it. Thank you. This is a life-changing comment. But what I wanted to say is something that we've all heard before, but because I'm the Venezuelan in the room, I'm going to allow myself to read a quote. Children who are materially poor gain spiritual wealth through music. And once music has brought them such riches, their minds, souls, and spirits can carry them onward and upward.
That's a lovely addition. Thank you so much, Patricia.
So that always helps in very formal documents to throw in a Maestro Abreu quote, and then everyone gets.
It helps in Zoom meetings too. It helps all over the place.
And we've got also a similar message from Taru. And Taru wrote, in this really material world, it is also important to highlight the non-materialistic experiences that we offer to kids and to the community. So I think it's about the same thing you were saying now.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you, Taru. Thank you.
Thank you. And I actually thought of that in the climate aspect, but it goes really well here too.
How does it connect in the climate discussion?
Well, this kind of non-materialistic experiences, and we are living in this kind of consumer world, and really all this material all over. Then kids are like fed up with
materialism.
So this kind of non-materialistic experiences are really important to get to know and like highlight more of those and teach
Beautiful.
also more this kind of experiences for kids to learn.
That's beautiful, and you're right. It's a potent point in both of these areas, that by reducing the inequality of access to a music and a humanistic education, we're reducing all kinds of inequalities of, as Mary says, cultural capital, and as Abreu says, soul and spirit. Let's see. I had as my third point what practice you plan to add to your programs to strengthen your contribution to this SDG. Let's talk about that for just a minute. To strengthen your commitment to reducing inequalities. Is there something you can imagine doing that you're not doing yet that would really strengthen this point?
I do wonder, you know, Systema programs by their very nature, taking kids who are, you know, this is an attempt to redistribute equality or equity or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But those doing the operation don't always show that same sense of diversity and inclusion. And so therefore, I think there's an interesting thing to undertake, to place the mirror on your organization as a whole, not just on kids. And, you know, in Europe, I think you'll find, you know, almost universally white managements, almost universally white, I'm not sure, but you know, governance. And so I think that's where leveling up can also take place. And there can also be a kind of age leveling up, which is, I know a lot of programs are beginning to think more and more about young people being part of the decision making at governance level. And so that's another way that I think you can redistribute. Beautiful.
You can, right, redistribute power and reduce inequality.
Yeah, redistribute. There should be an SDG called the redistribution of power.
I think that's another, but don't you think that sort of belongs to this SDG? That reducing inequality does redistribute
completely.
Power?
It's all, to my opinion, it's all about the distribution of power and who holds power in the organization, and the ability of organizations to be power porous,
right,
and not to be power hoarding,
right. And you know, there is many Systema programs in this connection are trying to redistribute power even among the students, staff, and administrators as they are, and trying in all of the experiments that we're seeing now with regard to youth voice and youth leadership and sort of intern leaders. That's another way that we reduce inequalities within our nucleos, within our Systema programs.
I also think that the peer learning, you know, which is built into Systema methodology is a huge, you know, a kid who's, you know, it's the old thing, the kid who plays 2 notes is a teacher. They teach the kid who knows 1 note. And that's an amazing redistribution. And so to have that thread through the culture of your organization is tremendously powerful.
So having said all that, I want to just move to that point 4 and point out how powerful all of your statements were about this business of reducing inequalities, but how difficult it is to measure a lot of what we've been talking about. Some of it's very measurable. Some of it is, you know, if we're going to change the makeup of our staffs in some way, or if we're going to redistribute duties within an organization, that's measurable. But sort of measuring demonstrable impact toward reducing inequalities, we have to, it's a tough job, but an important one, to figure out what metrics we're going to use. Does anybody have ideas about that? I mean, we can cite large statistics that say this many children in Scotland don't have access to music education. This many children in Scotland now have access to music education. That's a good start. But I feel like with reference to specific communities, we all need to do that more rigorously with measuring our own impact about that.
A couple of thoughts there. I'm reminded of the way El Sistema Japan has gathered a metric about how much time students actually spend teaching other students, how much time, basically how student time is allocated.
Right.
And there might be a way to slightly adjust that data gathering so that you could show a kind of distribution of responsibilities change. And I also wanted to mention there are psychometric measures that, you know, they're not perfect, and they're psychological data gathering, which has question marks around it, but actually does show changes in perception of other people that over time would likely present dramatic evidence of kids who have been years in a systemic program that is prioritizing this, arriving at a view of equal value that their peers who did not go through such a project do not have.
Yeah, we need those. We need those metrics and those measuring tools.
Can I just comment that I think I agree that there is a huge pressure to produce numbers and metrics, but I think there's also an onus on us to be unapologetic for the complex nature of what we do, and to get to know and become familiar with core work which stands beside complexity. So in the UK, the Medical Research Council have acknowledged that many public health interventions are not understandable through traditional trials and numbers led, that we actually have to have different methods. And I think there's lots of people in universities who are seeking to help support people who do complex work to understand their work. So I think I would argue for balance, because sometimes the richness of change is not amenable to the number. And I wouldn't give up, and I don't think anybody for a minute would ever want to. But we can get really rigorous about doing good qualitative work.
That's lovely. I really appreciate that contribution, because when we think of evaluation, we almost always think about quantitative and statistical. And if we are able to prioritize good qualitative work, and if that's becoming more and more acceptable, that's really crucial for us to know. So thank you for that.
I would also point out there's a number of programs where our students who have gained some capacity and courage actually take on leadership roles in wealthier settings. And the sort of, I don't know quite how you document the accomplishment that is represented by a student of poverty coming in and effectively leading a group of wealthy children of another race. And the few times I have heard of specific occasions where this has been carefully planned, it is often cited as one of the kids' recognitions of transition for themselves. So there's information there to be gleaned at a moment like that about a young person's recognition of new equality status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd love to pack this hypothetical letter of ours with as many of those both quantitative and qualitative ideas as we can. And Mary, I'm very grateful for you to you for taking notes. And what I can tell all of you is that I'm going to get the notes from Mary that she takes and put them into a letter form that's complete, that completely represents sort of everything we're turning up here and turning over and looking at. And hopefully this will actually be something practical that when you are looking for partnership sometime or looking for support sometime and wanting to make a case around the SDGs, you could actually use this letter. Could be a very concretely useful thing that comes out of this. So I appreciate the brainstorming. Let's go to our other two goals that we voted on were good health and well-being and quality education, correct? Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. That's right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think so.
So good health and well-being, I feel like we heard a very powerful presentation about that that's kind of what the nature of Systema Scotland was doing and measuring in its research and evaluation project. So let's take quality education and let's just spend our last 10 or 15 minutes talking about how we would make a case to dear World Bank or hypothetical powerful person in the universe that we want to partner with and we want to have a potential impact on. How do our programs contribute to quality education? And I think there are several kinds of answers to this question, but I'd love to hear your shots at it. Anybody?
So this is quality education, is it? Or well-being?
Yeah, quality education. And we're saying why and how do our programs. Yes.
I mean, there are some more interesting answers to this, but I mean, one basic answer is just the literally the skill set and training paradigm which the young people are led through or go through. You know, we don't have to make the 10,000 hours argument, and I know Eric has a particular qualification on what kind of 10,000. In fact, that may be part of it. You know, not only is this 10,000 hours, it's a very specific form of effective 10,000 hours because. But I mean, just all the training that goes in, which is a fundamental part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very obvious thing to say.
Yeah,
I would add just off the top, one of the rare areas where we have actual research data is in the development of executive function in Systema programs, which is universally accepted as an essential component of effective learning, is the skill set, as Marshall was referring to, that's called executive function, that is about self-management of your own learning processes. And there's research done in the US that shows good, hard, reliable data that Systema program work develops executive function much more rapidly than kids who are not involved in Systema work.
Yeah, again, a very pragmatic element is that our programs extend the learning day for the majority of children we work with. They're just in an education setting for longer. And I think that it's those simple things that are often missed that I would make sure was in a letter. So I think that's one thing. And then the other is just maybe for another of these statements, but it's around that research, and which others here are probably even more aware than I am of the increasing wealth of research about how specifically learning instruments, but in those different ways, you know, is as being proved to develop wider, broader education goals. But I wonder if anyone's really started to collate this research in a way that you're suggesting there, Eric, that there's something specific to and pertinent to a Systema program and the way that that can perhaps support that executive function. There's evidence about reading notation, how that develops brain another way, and there's obviously evidence about how creative improvising music can develop the brain another way. So I'm not sure where I'd go to find a collective bit of research. So I wonder if there's something that's really not to put in this letter, but obviously a good snapshot of that research is something that would go in the letter.
You know, I have files, very thick files of, you know, study after study after study, which I've always meant to sort of collate. I don't know whether there is a collation of them, but there are lots of them now and very powerful. So that is something we should be looking for, is the collation of that. But Tricia.
Well, in regards of the executive functions, I recently read somewhere someone explaining about their Systema project about the relationship between emotional self-regulation and the experience in the orchestra when you learn how to stop when you're supposed to stop, and how to play when you're supposed to play, how to be silent when you're supposed to be silent, breathing, all these things are connected to contributing to self-regulating. So that on one regard. The other thing, I think there's extensive data on where the disadvantages start in disadvantaged background children. So there's a number that to me is awful, which is the amount of vocabulary a toddler or a preschool kid has, depending of the amount of education the parents have. So if a kid has parents that didn't go to school, then by the age of whatever, they only have, I don't know, 10,000 words. But if they live with parents that are professionals that have university degrees, the number is off the wall different. It's awful, the difference. So in continuing the hours of education, also of being exposed to a different learning environment that is professional, that is high quality, that is high standard. I think that also addresses quality education that they might not be exposed to, not only in school, hopefully, yes, but outside of school, then it ends, and it does make a huge difference. So
yeah, and the fact that so many of our programs start early in childhood is a powerful thing in that regard.
Could I just extend on what Pat's first point, because obviously one of the great hallmarks of Systema work is the stress on ensemble work, and I think there's a huge argument to be made for the absolute vital importance socially of ensemble learning, and particularly of learning the ability to work together. I mean, sorry, I'll get off the soapbox, but for me, that's the most important thing in life, is that we all become educated to understand how we can work better with others. Once we do that, we solve anything. So I think that Systema work really has such a focus on working together, that's a prized social asset.
I think we could make an argument for that as not only a prized social asset, but actually civic education is education in being a citizen, living in a civic environment, all of those things. Something that's so essential in education and doesn't really take place in lots of public school settings. In lots of not here, certainly doesn't here. And so I think our education systems are woefully missing in that kind of civic collective education and system.
And the irony is that even in the families where you've got, a million words because they've got 2 university professors, it doesn't necessarily mean that the learning the child has got any sense of social skill.
Exactly.
So this is that balanced side.
Eric,
I would add one thing that will help our letter, which is people love to see an example to actually ground that this is not just all theory and data collection. I would drag that poor letter recipient to see Renaissance Arts Academy in Los Angeles, which is a middle and high school with an embedded Systema music and dance program, a regular curriculum that is Systema-esque throughout, and is the #1 academic achieving middle and high school in Los Angeles. So it's a real vibrant example.
What's it called?
Renaissance Arts Academy, Ren Arts. I'll put a link in the chat box, but it's the real deal. And they don't have much research, but spend 20 minutes there and you're a convert.
Just to follow on from that from Eric, I'd love to see that link and see that school. There's a real movement at the moment in the broader music education sector, in certainly in Scotland. So that's beyond the music education that happens beyond Systema programs, to highlight the woeful lack of music education that happens within schools. So teacher training, I think it's worked out now that in UK primary school teacher training, there is over a year of really intensive learning course. 1 hour on average is given to music in that training. And there's a lot of moves to try and address this. And I think along with the research that learning music has those broader, wider aims. So one of the things we're working with partners on is how do we improve that, and how do we work with teachers to support them to learn. So I think there's again, coming back to CPD and continual professional development for teachers working on the ground, is a way of of spreading our work and making it go beyond our immediate programs. So that
Right.
people element is crucial. There's
That's
one other thing, just on the research side, it just made me think. There was one. I went to a study with presented with a child psychologist, and this is going to be no good to any of you because I can't remember the name of the researcher, but it was the way they framed the research, which I thought was new for me, and it was about the brain development and neural connections that are made from singing, which I'm sure we're all familiar with here that happens, but it was the way this research had framed it was flipping it and saying, if this doesn't happen, if a 3-4-year-old child is not sung to, this is the damage that will happen to their brain. And it was categorical, it was scientific, it had been, it had been reviewed, but that switch in the framing for me was really stark. It's not just as an add-on, if you do this, your child will grow up and be fantastic. It was, if you don't do this, it's tantamount to some form of, however small, but it's almost abuse was the tenor of this research, which I thought was fascinating. So maybe there's some way of reframing this.
Yes, many ways. Thank you. And we have a comment from Taru. I don't see you, but the experience of succeeding and the feeling I can do this, especially with kids from disadvantaged kids. Yes, the feeling of their own strength and their own self-confidence. Huge part, an educational aspect, an important part of education for sure. Eric, I understand you have a question from our listener?
Yes, Axel Miel, who had joined us earlier but had to go off for class. She is one of our young people, and she's the head of the ambassadors program in the World Ensemble. She has a question, and she wanted us to address it and promised to look at the recording of this session all the way through to hear her question answered. So there it is in the chat box. And she wanted to know that our Systema programs often take on non-musical responsibilities, especially in places where such services are otherwise inaccessible. How do we balance providing this much needed support to young people in the programs versus running and staff resources thin because of pressure to be a catch-all solution? We probably won't fully answer that in the next couple of minutes, but I promised her we'd give a shot at it so she could hear the thinking of this group.
And that question became especially crucial during the pandemic, for sure. Peter, yeah.
Can I just comment? That's a really excellent and extremely pertinent question. And obviously, I'm just struck in relation to certainly the way that the areas that I chose to focus on in terms of our program delivery were often on those non-musical elements.
Right.
Certainly within our staff team, and I'm aware we've got our break and we're coming back in the 16th of August. I think there's a tension amongst our staff and musicians between that non-musical support that we give and the passion of doing the music, and that's what our staff want to do. And I think so. I'm not sure I have an answer to the question, but it's certainly a recognition, and it resonates that there is that tension. I do think that the both are important, and that partnering is perhaps the answer. That we are, if we create those musical links, that leads to some of the broader relationships you can develop, and perhaps that leads to being able to refer children to partners who can support some of those non-musical elements. But I think that's a great question. I think for everybody.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else have a thought about that?
I was just thinking that, all the time when I used to teach in Venezuela, that, I would see the kids come in and be given food right from the very beginning, to be ready before sessions. And right from the beginning, I always learned that, one of the great things about the nuclear was it was dry, clean, safe, free. And all of those non-music things, to me, are an absolutely integral part of it. And I understand what Peter is saying, that there is a tension here, because within the organization, there's a kind of push to want to get the kids in the lessons and get the teaching and get this wonderful stuff going. But actually, in the end, this is a holistic approach, which means you have to take on the responsibility for making the whole bubble of it work. Yeah.
Yes, and I would just add that I think the experience that a lot of programs had during the pandemic, when they did address more directly immediate needs and not sometimes to the expense of musical needs, one thing that they found was that their community rallied around them, and they were closer and more deeply connected to the community than they ever had been when the connections were primarily musical. So I think there's a huge deep benefit of just community building to be gained by thinking that way.
I think there's also an artistic benefit because, you know, you have to be in the right frame to work. And, you know, so we have, you know, actually there's a musical argument for this, you know, that you have to have a little bit of food in your stomach to be able to have the interest to play. And without that, I mean, I'm putting it in a very kind of crude way, but I think the more that you tend, you know, it's that old negotiation thing. If you solve the other person's problem, they'll solve your problem. If your problem is that you want them to have these wonderful performances or learning or the rest of it, you have to solve their problems to enable them to have the space to then go out and do that.
Great. Well, I think maybe on that note, this is a good time to wrap up. I would like to thank first Mary for taking those notes. I can't wait to get them, and I'm going to make them into the most persuasive letter that a hypothetical World Bank officer ever got, and I'm going to send it to all of you and everyone who's listening in, not on video as well. And I want to thank Peter and Mary for your beautiful presentation. Really very inspiring to see how seriously you've taken this meld of music and good health and made them really all into one thing in your program and demonstrated it so powerfully. Great example to us all. And I just want to end by saying thank you for coming. I really think that this, as Marshall said, these are becoming ever more important. We really need to pay attention to them. And what I would say is not only need to pay attention to them, we need to take the lead on this. We need to really help the rest of the world see exactly how strong we are as drivers, catalysts, agents for change. So with that note, thank you all. Look forward to talking about this again soon, and have a great rest of your day.